Some longtime fans may be aware of my obsession of utilizing people's poo for my own benefit. Now, for those that don't know, that's a pretty bold statement, but hear me out. Now, most people seem to underestimate the power of poo, as when it's refined into chem fuel, it can be used for a variety of different things, like powering your home, creating alcohol that makes you explode upon death, but most importantly, it can be refined into deadly weapons of war. So I've taken it upon myself to show you the power of your own excrement by giving myself the challenge to build an economy based on poo and then fund a crusade to destroy my neighbors. Now, to make sure we don't succumb to the effects of being burned to death via our own poo, I've created a special xenotype that will instead thrive in it. Our group of specially selected colonists will all be fire immune, superheat resistant, and immune to pollution. To balance out our traits, I gave my colonists a poor taste in art, vibrant red hair, and an addiction to hard drugs. Essentially, I had pretty much created an enhanced version of the Waster xenotype, which, honest to God, the game named itself Boner. I launched into the game with our three trusty boners, Mike, White, and Jet, and after doing a brief assessment of the map, I had discovered I had a single strategic advantage, a single entry point which we could abuse with a kill box later on. However, we were also surrounded by a vast cave network that was infested with bugs, which I countered by just sealing them off for the time being and worrying about that later. Because for now, it was time to erect some buildings. I built a barracks, a warehouse, and finally the most important thing, the latrine. Now, to actually transform our colonist waste into valuable resources, we were first going to need a designated area for collecting poo. Then once we have researched biofuel refining, we can then refine our fecal sludge into usable chem fuel. From here, we can then use the chem fuel as a source of renewable power, brew it into sellable chemshine, or utilize it as fuel for discussions about the borders with our neighbors. So I set Mike up with a research bench and gave him the task of figuring out biofuel refining. Following this, I planted some rice fields, named our faction accordingly. My base had begun to shape up nicely. Cock. However, my unique architecture had attracted some unwanted attention. A man named Howard, who was armed with a hammer and a misguided sense of ambition to destroy my shaft, tried to engage us in single combat, where he brought a hammer and White brought a rifle. Idiot. After pilfering the clothes from Howard's corpse, we had managed to produce our first barrel of valuable fecal sludge. Simultaneously, Mike had finished researching biofuel refining, so it was now time to create a chem fuel generator. However, I ran into the problem of needing power to create fuel to fuel the generator. Presented with two options, we weighed our choices carefully. On one hand, we could dip our toes into squeaky clean renewable green energy, but on the other hand, we could build something called a toxified generator, which simply works by sucking the lifeblood out of the environment and turning it into a desolate wasteland. Yeah, I think we'll go with that one. Now, with a little bit of pollution powering the base, we were able to begin the process of refining our poo. But not before I stumbled across a few problems. Firstly, I had completely forgotten to give myself some drugs, which meant my colonists were currently suffering from the effects of withdrawal. While the effects were minor for now, this wasn't really a problem. But if I left it for too long, our colonists would eventually drop into a coma and die. To prevent this from happening, I placed down some emergency drug fields and prayed that nothing else would go wrong. Oh no, not good, not good. Right now, you're probably thinking, it's just a thunderstorm, Rarr. Calm down. While this may be a mere inconvenience for most people, this posed a significant threat to my band of fire worshippers, because if they extinguished the fire, they would receive a -20 mood debuff.
-20 for 6 days?
Unfortunately, the psychological strain of extinguishing a goddamn fire proved too much for our poor boy Jet.
Oh, for fuck's sake. And then Mike just has a catatonic because he extinguished a fucking fire.
This is probably a good time to talk about what exactly our ideology was. Simply titled the Fire Worshippers, our little collective believed in excessive drug use, being a pirate, and burning people to death. Following the incident were a few slow and painful days, while we waited for our emergency drugs to grow. In the meantime, I had given Mike the task of researching psychite brewing, believing that a stimulating tea would provide a more wholesome alternative than crack. For the time being, a semblance of peace had prevailed, and our daily routine for our colonists consisted of consuming some herbal tea, followed up by a quick suck on the exhaust pipe of our toxified generator. Now both high and stimulated, our colonists would set off to complete their daily tasks. Until one day, our peaceful existence was shattered by an unexpected intruder. A single man arrived and broke through one of the walls blocking off the insect-infested caves. He then stole a shirt and ran. Anyway, with our initial early game problems resolved, I thought it was about time we started to build some sort of an economy. Instead of refining the fecal matter and then selling the chem fuel at an incredibly low price, we decided to take our homebrewed chem fuel and ferment it into chemshine. Many of you probably know what chemshine is at this point, but for those that don't, it's an alcoholic drink which makes you dangerously volatile when consumed, basically turning your body into a weapon. More importantly, when you think about it though, we just created an endless cycle of free money, as long as our colonists keep pooping. But with only 3 colonists, our supply of poo wasn't going to make us millionaires anytime soon. This gave us 2 options. Either we wait for some new colonists to arrive, or we go out there and kidnap some families to accelerate our poo production. We picked option 2, and sent White out with a bolt-action rifle to a nearby mining camp. White then proceeded to try and disable the fuck out of one of the targets by aiming at their legs.
What?
But it's okay, as this guy had only had his toe blown off. So we patched him up and... Are you actually fucking kidding me right now? With only 3/4 of a hostage, we returned home and was greeted with a quest to host a man. In my mind, that's 24 days of extra feces and 2 advanced components for us. So we accepted the quest and began our next task of enslaving the prisoner. So after some swift negotiations, we enslaved the man and renamed him to One Leg, because he has 1 leg. Shortly after this, 4 men with sniper rifles arrived to try and condemn my new business. To counter this, I used the highly advanced tactic of hiding around a corner and shooting them as they walked past, giving me 2 additional prisoners in which I could extract from. However, they didn't seem too enthusiastic about spending their last remaining days imprisoned, and decided to start a rebellion, which resulted in Hawk stabbing both of them to death, which was actually a godsend for us because many of you may know that despite my nearly 3,000 hours in this game, I still suck at it, as the colony may have run out of food, and unfortunately for us, we weren't cannibals, so we couldn't just consume the dead and be done with it. Instead, we played a fun little game involving a mega sloth and a rifle. Just run, Jet, run! It'll bleed out eventually. And sold off our first batches of chemshine in exchange for food. While we were doing that, I set up some hydroponics, which managed to provide us enough rice to survive the rest of the winter. With the loss of our prisoners and Hawk returning home, our chemshine production had all but halted. The only chem fuel we did produce was being shoved into our chem fuel generators that were currently powering the base. But I had a brilliant idea. During the winter, I had given Mike a single task: to research microelectronics, which would give us access to a trading console. From there, you can check the price of goods, secure loans, but most importantly, put out contracts for certain goods. I envisioned that buying our poo would be a much more humane way of conducting our business rather than kidnapping people and forcing them into dark rooms with latrines. However, it appeared that purchasing human waste was not deemed as socially acceptable, so I guess it was back to the old ways. But not before I built some goddamn defenses. This may have resulted in me building a suspicious-looking structure that may or may not resemble a kill box, which Muffalo immediately took offense against.
You son of a bitch!
Now, if I was going to send someone out to kidnap people, I was going to need a warrior who was capable of surviving the wilderness by themselves. Currently, my only real capable fighter was White, but her presence at the colony was becoming increasingly required, and it was as if Randy had heard my prayers, as a transport pod landed and Mummy had arrived. She was a 79-year-old woman in a war casket with a massive fucking sword, and was a perfect candidate for our kidnapping department. So I sent White out to negotiate her terms of employment, and set up the nicest goddamn prison I think I've ever made in my life. Because if she rebelled, I think we may have had a problem. During her imprisonment, I sent each one of my colonists in, one by one, to simp and beg her to join my colony. Oh, and some caravan animals wandered in, which may have resulted in some elk developing a crippling alcohol addiction.
Oh my god! Look at all them just swarming the vodka! Actually clean that shit out in 2 seconds. Fucking hell.
But hey, a free batch of Luciferium. Thankfully, after many days of our campaign of relentless compliments, she joined the colony. We began by inducting her into our ideology, by having her mercifully beat a slave to the brink of death. I then decided to turn her into the ultimate warrior, by giving her some of the Luciferium that we acquired earlier, which in exchange for boosting her stats basically meant if she ran out, she'll go crazy and then die. I then sent her up north to beat up some mechanoids and then gave her a final test of beating up a few alpha beavers for good measure. Before sending her out to kidnap some people for us, I thought this would be a good opportunity to remove the bugs that had been surrounding our base since we arrived. I had Jet make up a heavy flamer and construct a large collection of wooden stools inside this cave. Then I used a flamethrower to ignite the wooden furniture, causing the caves to reach temperatures where their disgusting insectoid flesh began to melt. Once they were all incapacitated from heat stroke, we sent our warrior in to finish the job. And just as we were cutting the throat of the last one, this time though, I couldn't just burn some wooden furniture and be done with it. I had to get a little more intimate. By having Jet inject a shit ton of go juice and a quick mouthful of pollution, we sent him in to ignite the queen at our hive, which proved to be incredibly successful. With her hive destroyed and the queen covered in burn wounds, it was only a matter of time before the bitch developed some infections and died. With the insect menace now dealt with, we were now able to extract some of the valuable resources within the caves, while our kidnapper was sent out to kidnap people. And before long, our base had grown to accommodate a small collection of prisoners whose one goal in life was to fill up this latrine. But it seemed like they didn't appreciate my hospitality, as they began an endless spiral of attempting to break out of jail, resulting in them repeatedly getting beaten to death by our warden. So, it was time for something I called Operation Tough Shit, where I took the War Crimes Expanded mod and began conducting a variety of unethical surgeries. So I started by taking a page out my good friend Reggie's book, by taking a log and bashing them over the head until they had reached the golden zone of brain damage. However, I don't think Mike got the memo. Jesus, I said give her brain damage, not blow her fucking head off, Christ! In the end, I just settled on sewing the prisoner's eyes shut. Perfect. There we go. Try and rebel now, you little bitch. However, this mindless torturing of prisoners proved too much for one of our slaves, who went into a sadistic rage and began punching the now blind prisoners to death. Unfortunately, it seemed that violence didn't seem to solve our problem, as our prisoners, who were now blind, continued to try and fight back. Oh, come on! So it was now time for another operation, titled Operation Satisfying Poo, which was based on the success of recruiting Mummy. I started by placing down some recreational activities like a horseshoe post and a chessboard, but in hindsight, that wasn't such a great idea considering the prisoners were blind. I then upgraded their tiny prison cells into luxurious bedrooms, and surprisingly, this actually worked, and the rebellion seemed to have died down. With our prisoners now producing us a steady supply of product, I think it was time to expand our chemshine production. I'd also replaced all our chem fuel generators with toxified generators, which I just shoved inside this church right next to my hydroponics. With our increased production of chemshine came some serious financial gains, which I spent on buying a mountain of components which allowed me to build a bang bus. To raise morale, I roasted some elk and then some raiders that I managed to bait into my environmentally friendly kill box, which turned out to be incredibly flammable. And so did they. Now at this point, I was making a lot of chemshine, which converted into a lot of cash, but my decision to continuously flood the market had resulted in the price of chemshine dropping by 66%. But that's okay, because most of the money I had made at this point was funneled into resources to make me weapons. The only thing I was lacking at this point was armor. So I researched recon armor, built a fabrication bench, and looked at the resources that were required to make it. Yeah, fuck that. So instead of making all my soldiers into walking tanks, I just built a proper tank and decided to name it the Poo Cannon. I then loaded it up with some of our homebrewed chem fuel and then decided to give the cannon a test fire. Yeah, it was a little underwhelming, I won't lie. During the rest of the winter, we had another infestation rise up, which we dealt with accordingly. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, this is good. This is real good. And then feasted on their deep-fried flesh. We also cracked open the Ancient Danger and had our warrior clean it out, which thankfully had some more Luciferium in. It also gave us a whole set of powerful armor, which I could use for the upcoming crusade against the non-believers, which at this point, I think it was time. With our group of well-equipped colonists, a tank, and the poo cannon, I believed it was time to expand our territory and subject our neighbors to my reign of terror. I ended up leaving one leg behind to oversee the base, as he had been a loyal slave to this point, so I had no fears of him running off. With that, I loaded everyone up into our vehicles and... yeah, okay, maybe I should clean that up first before we left. My first target was the tribal village, which I thought was going to be a piece of cake. After all, it was just a band of naked men with spears. We had assault rifles and tanks. Or so I thought. Oh, this is a good start. The fucking vehicle ain't working. Why is the tank not moving? As I was trying to repair the tank, the tribals launched a surprise attack. Panicking, I scrambled to get my people into battle formation, and in the chaos, I accidentally placed this guy behind our front line. Get him! Who proceeded to shoot one of our boys in the back of the head. The remainder of the battle was a blur of machine gun fire and then roasting them alive with flamethrowers. And after a short while, the tribals had realized their mistake and tried to flee. But let's just say it was a little bit too late for them. After the battle, I then sent Jet in to burn down the village, which looked pretty cool in a horribly morbid way. With the tribals defeated, it was time to move on to our next target, the outlanders. Thankfully, the tank actually worked this time, which was fantastic as the outlanders had begun hurling mortar rounds at us. The only problem for them, they were firing smoke at us. We then rolled the tank up and began blasting their turrets before moving Jet in with the flamethrower and began roasting them. And then, like last time, this battle quickly derailed into anarchy, with fire and poisonous gas littering the battlefield and my colonists running out of ammo. But thankfully, our warrior was an absolute unit and managed to cut down a majority of the outlanders and win the battle for us. With our only casualty being Steroid, who just got shot. With the outlanders defeated, it just left one target, the Empire. The Empire were going to be a tough fight. The soldiers were well equipped, and they also had some melee units that could rival our warrior. Oh, and they also had a mortar which actually had high explosive shells in. But I had a brilliant idea. I loaded up a bunch of pollution, chem fuel, and one leg, who I had dosed up with as much chem shine as possible, and launched him towards the mortar. Fuck. So I drove the tank headfirst into the base and began blowing up their turrets. The tank was immediately swarmed by their melee units, and I had to make a difficult decision. Either try and save the tank or have Jet engulf the thing in fire. At this point, it'll probably be a good time to tell you that White was inside the tank, and Jet and White had got married before heading out for this attack. Anyway, I chose the latter and set the tank ablaze alongside the surrounding warriors. And within a few moments, White and the tank were lost, and we had only taken out one of the warriors. But in better news, one leg finally detonated. With the tank destroyed, a horde of soldiers began to advance towards Jet. But Jet managed to convince them that running headfirst into a flamethrower was a bad idea. And the fight continued until finally... they broke. And we had finally done it. We had killed enough of them that they began to flee. Well, except from this guy, but that's okay, I guess. I'll just burn him with the rest of his base. Oh my god, he's got... okay then.